nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, item 3 is public comment. We have nobody registered for public comment today, so we can move on to item 4, approval of the May 7, 2024 Public Safety Committee meeting minutes. Those were included within the packet. Do we have a motion? Motion by Mass. Do we have a second? Second by Hoppe. All those in favor? Carries. Item 5, policy issues for discussion, potential committee determination. We have none before us today. We also have no operational functions required by statute, ordinance, resolution, or policy. So with that, we can move on to 7, educational presentations and committee discussion. Item A, introduction of departments and entities that often appear before the committee. And item 1 is an update from emergency management.
So if I might, Mr. Chair, I want to say I apologize. Last meeting you had the introduction of all the departments, save one. I left inadvertently. I left our emergency management department off of the list. But today we'll kind of take the same approach, introduce you to Phil, and then I'll pull up the annual budget document, which I know all of you are very familiar with. But Phil can just talk you through a little bit about his department. It's a small but mighty department, and we can answer any questions kind of that, or Phil certainly can, about kind of the work of emergency management, and I can talk when we get to the later items about how you might see information come from emergency management to this committee and the full board throughout the coming term. But certainly I think it's, I like to use analogies a lot in my work, and for those of you that are sports fans or football fans, it's like Phil is sometimes like the left tackle. People, you don't know that you really need one until you really know you need one, or they screw something up. But our recent severe weather we've had, certainly Phil was very active, as were a number of our departments. But the work of the emergency manager, Phil can talk you through, is sometimes you don't know the value of it until you really need it. And Phil is a resource throughout the state of Wisconsin for a lot of counties and for Wisconsin emergency management. So with that, a bit long introduction, Phil, why don't you kind of introduce yourself, your department, talk through what you do, and if you need me to scroll through the budget document, I can do that for you.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Administrator Leonard. We are the smallest department, actually, not small, smallest department in the county, 2 people, but I do have another person since that time of that newsletter that was put up. We do have a casual limited term employee that's running the Medical Reserve Corps. We received a grant for that, and with that funding, we've been able to bring somebody on a casual basis. So we do have 2, I'll say 2.5 staff right now. Yes, we have been busy. We had those situations that occurred out in the western part of the county about 3 weeks ago. We had tornadoes that came through with some high winds. Spent some time out in Pontotoski, out in Edgar, and Unity as well, as the sheriff was there as well, and the chief was there with me as well. We had a lot of damage out there, a lot of activity going on in that evening, but that wasn't when the work all ended. We had a lot of damage assessment that had to be done. After that, the days following that, we worked with the National Weather Service from Green Bay coming out there to make the assessment on just what did we have out there. Was it winds? Was it tornadoes? And if it was a tornado, how strong of a tornado was it? That work continues on. We still have damage assessment that has to be submitted to the state of Wisconsin for communities that declared a disaster and is looking for reimbursement from the state through their Wisconsin Disaster Fund. In a nutshell, that's basically what I do. I do a lot of preparedness, a lot of protection, response to situations, and recovery for communities as well. We also get into mitigation areas as well, whether or not there's projects out there that we are considering for mitigation. With that, the information is in the packet. Do you have any questions for me? I'm open. Yes. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I just got a couple questions. The wind turbines have been a big controversial thing here in the western part of the county, and I got 2 of them that are related to the EMS. Would be as far as like these turbines, they're about 660 feet tall. Do we have, as far as municipality fire departments, is there any municipalities that have the capabilities and the training to fight like these electrical fires at if these things start on fire? Because it does happen. I mean, it happens enough, but not a lot, but enough in different. Last week there was, I think, a couple of them. There's an article about it in Ohio that a few of them started on fire with this storm and stuff, with the storm down there.
Sure. Oh, great question. First, I heard of it, that these turbines were going to go up in the western part of the county. But let me lead into this that says that I'm the county emergency management director. However, every municipality, whether it's a city, village, or town, also has to have an emergency manager, and each municipality also has to have an emergency management plan. Hopefully these communities that are getting these turbines have developed some type of emergency response plan for that. So without seeing that, I can't comment on what they're doing out there.
And then I got one other one too for, as far as like the airspace for the, as far as like for the helicopters and stuff, for the Flight for Life and that with these turbines. I know like around the airport in Mosinee, they got like a 6 mile, they can't put any turbines because of the vortex and the different winds that affect the flight. And I'm just curious if that's going to affect like the helicopters with the Flight for Life and stuff like that, as far as patterns and.
Another great question. I don't know. It's just a topic that I have not explored, but it's certainly something. If this committee would like me to prioritize and put it on our integrated preparedness plan, we could certainly take a look at it over the next year or two. We do have an integrated preparedness planning workshop at the end of the month of July that's going to cover. The workshop essentially develops the integrated preparedness plan. And in that plan, we identify the risks, the threats, and the hazards that are facing Marathon County. We identify any shortfalls, we identify our capabilities, and the resources that we can place against those shortfalls. So if that's something that committee, that work group, which I welcome you to attend, or anybody here to attend as well, it's going to be held at the Lakeview Conference Center in July again. If that's a topic that you'd like us to pursue, we certainly could.
Yeah. Thank you much.
The administrator has something to add.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Phil alluded to the integrated preparedness planning work. So a lot of what Phil does is exactly what he alluded to in working with the various emergency managers and municipalities throughout the county. He brings a lot of training training opportunities to Marathon County for not only our local municipal leaders, but also throughout the region. Phil has been one of the common people reserving rooms within the Lakeview Conference Center for those trainings on behalf of Wisconsin Emergency Management. The other piece that is referenced in the annual budget in terms of a funding stream is the EPCRA grant, the emergency, I'm going to butcher it's the Community Right to Know funding stream. So Phil does a lot of work with helping communities and even entities, like if you think about large businesses, have those emergency plans based on some of the activities that they're involved in, and you actually have one of your ordinances provides the mechanism for that Community Right to Know group to meet, which is our local emergency planning committee, and Phil leads that. You have county board members on there. Supervisor Marash is currently a member of that committee, but they do exactly what Phil just said, really sit down and engage to make sure the individual entity, based on the work that they're doing, or the municipality kind of really have a good handle as to what plans they should have in place in the event something were to take place. So that's a big part of kind of the work that Phil does, in addition to what he just alluded to with aiding municipalities in the event of severe weather, for example, and making sure they understand what they need to do in terms of damage assessments to avail themselves of the various funding opportunities that might exist at the state or federal level.
If I could just clarify on that acronym, it's a long one. EPCRA stands for Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act. It's a state-funded grant that we use to fund one of our positions. My department's funded primarily by grants, not necessarily just the levy. It's by the Emergency Management Performance Grant, the EPCA grant, the Computer and Hazmat grant, and then any other grants that may come along, and I mentioned the Medical Reserve grant as well earlier.
Any other questions for Phil? Well, thank you for joining us and giving us an overview of emergency management. We can move on to a brief overview of significant discussion and action items from last term. And for this, I am going to defer to the administrator and certainly welcome input from some of the returning members to public safety, as I was not on last term. So, Administrator Leonard.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to kick it off, and again, as the chair referenced, I think the point of this item, and it was on every other standing committee agenda item last month, just to kind of orient everyone to some of the things that you'll frequently see. So I'll highlight a couple. Operationally, you're going to see if you have new position requests that would come through our process. Those have to go through a standing committee in accordance with your rules. Grants, as Phil just alluded to, if we have new grants that come about throughout the year, you'll have those come through this committee. You just recently had one with the sheriff's office and some equipment grant for whether it's our bomb team, dive team. Those were some things you had last time. And then another operational one that's relatively common. I hope to have it be less common, but amendments to our capital improvement plan within individual departments. So you've probably heard of the jail kitchen discussion and capital improvement work that we've done. That was something that the last committee looked at quite a bit, as well as it relates to emergency response that Phil just referenced to. Our dispatch center does all of the dispatching for fire and EMS within the county. And when we look at being able to do that, last term you amended our capital budget to address a need to have a new tower in light of some challenges we had on one of our towers in our system. So we had the Dancy Communications Tower Replacement Project, and Chief Deputy Milhausen came before you and walked you through kind of the various options that were available to us. And we ultimately, through our partnership with Bug Tussle, that you'll hear about more at your county board meeting this week, we're able to develop a plan where we're going to place that equipment on that tower as opposed to construct a separate tower. So those are some operational things that will come before you. Likewise, during the budget, you're going to have discussions here about moving beyond the overview that you've received the last two meetings now for departments. If there are significant program changes that are being sought by any of the departments, you'll have those discussions here. Are there things that you want us to look into delivering that we're currently not delivering? So kind of a new program. We'll have those discussions, and in your board packet this month is a mandatory or discretionary program document, which we developed last year as part of a kind of budget overhaul. So we try to give a high-level summary of every department and the programs that they deliver, again, at a very high level. So that document will have discussions here. Again, on the operational side, last term as well, in terms of funding, there was a lot of discussion about the Regional Forensic Science Center and moving that forward. You also had discussions about the opioid settlement dollars, sought input from both the Health and Human Services Committee and the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council before making a recommendation to the full board as to how to move forward. And then the last thing I'll talk about relative to budget prep internally for our budget is you had presentations from a number of nonprofits that the county contracts for services with that are funded through the annual budget. So the women's community works closely with the district attorney's office. The Judicare mediation program works closely with the courts. And then North Central Community Action Program provides a housing-related services that can impact the justice system. So those three presented to this committee, and ultimately the committee made a recommendation relative to continued funding in the budget process. And then the last thing relative to budget I'll talk about is you've also, in the last term, taken a couple of opportunities to advocate for budget changes at the state level, advocating for increased wages for assistant district attorneys within our district attorney's office, but across the state. And then also the Women's Community and Child Advocacy Center funding was cut, and this committee received an informational presentation. I should say the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council received that presentation, and then this committee made some recommendations to advocate for restoration of funding at the state level. So a lot of discussions across those various areas, the operational side, kind of the budget policy side, and then the budget policy side relative to the state budget. I will say that kind of when we have historically started new terms, it's always been a good opportunity as well to kind of orient the committees. They've taken the time to look at the strategic plan and see their areas of oversight, and certainly that took place in the last term as well. So that's kind of from my perspective, Mr. Chair, some of the areas of discussion, but certainly I know you have quite a number of returning members. They probably have things that they recall as well, or areas to bring up.
Are there any returning members to the committee that'd like to either elaborate on or add to what Lance has identified as areas of action that were addressed last term? Supervisor Sandelsky.
Yeah, I got something related to the drug courts. I think we need to kind of look into that deeper because if you get a chance, if you weren't on the committee, maybe look at the meeting from January. They did a presentation with the district attorney and one of the local FBI agents here, according to with the drug court stuff. So that's something I think we need to look into if it's worth continuing or not. Because according to what they're looking at, maybe we could get more insight from the sheriff or another department as far as how that's going with that drug court. But doesn't seem like, according to what the DA and that FBI agent in their presentations, it didn't seem like has been real successful. So something to look into. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other returning supervisors that would like to add to what Supervisor Sandelsky or Administrator Leonard covered from last term? Okay. With that, we can move on to discussion item C, 7C, discussion regarding potential areas of committee focus during this term. And, I'll just start by saying, obviously, coming back to this after having a term off, some of my areas of focus are certainly I want to expound on what Supervisor Sandelsky said. I'd like to have a continued look at the propriety of continuing the drug courts and, in what fashion the long-term future of that program is. And I am aware of the presentation you mentioned, which I had looked at. And then also some big items, one being the opioid settlement funding. And as I understand it from speaking with the administrator, that's going to be some time yet before we get the report back from the consultants that were retained, and it may even be after budget time, but that does present some advantages in the sense that we can talk about use of those funds individually, outside of the budget. And then, I think, those were two big areas of concern for me, but just from I always really enjoy, as we approach budget time, hearing in detail from all the departments, Sheriff's Department, the court system, the DA's office, and I welcome those discussions at any time throughout the year so that we can be well informed as we approach budget time of our priorities, because that seems to always come up before you know it. It's right around the corner. So I'd like to turn it over then at this time to any of the other committee members as to areas of focus that you would like to see us move forward with as this term progresses. Okay, Administrator Leonard, do you have any comments you'd like to add as areas of focus you see from the administrator's side of things for this term?
Sure. I think in terms of work for staff, transitioning from discussions at this committee about the Regional Forensic Science Center to getting it operational is going to be a lot of our work. I don't know if there's going to be too many areas where we need policy direction from this committee to do that, but certainly I appreciate the discussion about kind of the treatment courts and continued presentations on, whether pardon the pun, the juice is worth the squeeze. Do you want to allocate resources differently, and all of those decisions, I mean, the board, through your budget, you make them relative to actual money and then also people. And we're limited with respect to both. So I think conversations about those pieces are really important. The opioid settlement funds, just to piggyback on the comments of the chair, I think that's really going to be an area of opportunity. I know the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council made the recommendation for that gap analysis, which is moving forward. But the idea of how do you deploy those funds in a way that aligns with the strategic plan objectives that the board has outlined. And again, this committee is, you're one of the committees that have a heavy lift with regard to strategic plan responsibilities. You're either the lead committee or designated as a support committee for 4 of the 12 strategic plan objectives. Objective 3.3, 3.7, 7.1, and 7.2. So I think if we, my sense is it's always good to, it's been my experience, I should say, that it's always helpful to kind of step back and say, what are our objectives in light of limited funds and limited people resources, to where are we going to put our time, energy, and effort? And if we do so around those strategic plan priorities, I think that would be helpful. But from the staff perspective, I've had preliminary discussions about kind of getting ready for 2025 budget. So certainly we'll have some conversations there as well. But the HR Finance and Property Committee is bringing forward its recommendations for kind of budget priorities, very high level, at your meeting this month.
Okay, well, thank you. We can move on then to 2024 first quarter budget to actual update for justice system related departments.
Sure, I can kick it off, and you do have a number of department heads here. This has been a long-standing request, from my first day in administration. I've heard that, hey, it would be great if we could have a financial system that would kick out good budget to actual reports, and I would have thought we would have been able to get there sooner, but nevertheless, it has taken us this long, but our dedicated staff were able to get those things out with our new HR and finance system. So what you see in your packet are the budget to actuals for the first quarter. They are, again, through the end of March. So we had this presentation to HR Finance, and we're going to the various other standing committees with their departments of jurisdiction. From a high-level perspective, when I looked through these, there were a couple of questions I had just to clarify things. But the good news from an administration perspective is that what you'll see as you flip through these across the county, but certainly from the justice system as well, there's nothing really in terms of an outlier that, hey, we need to be worried about budgetary expenditures relative to a single department or even a single line item. There are some that we had some, I think the terminology we're using is mapping issues. We had, you'll see for all of the departments, for example, within employee benefits, that we're already at 200 and some % of expenditures. Well, the expenditure, even for the clerk of courts, is $1,828, and we're at just shy of 4,000. It was where we didn't appropriately map a small employee benefit line item, and Christy explained it at HR Finance. It's not a lot of dollars. We're doing very well in terms of our forecast. You'll see that the vast majority of departments are somewhere between that 20 to 30% expended through the first quarter of the year. And the explanation for that, in speaking with our various departments and looking at the financials, is that some departments have revenue or expenses that come in or go out early in the year, and sometimes we have revenues and expenses that come in or go out later in the year. But across the board, we're, from my perspective and from speaking with our finance director, we're on par with where we would expect to be. But if you do have specific questions on any given expenditure, HR Finance had a couple of questions, but we really just want to start orienting you to these reports. And we will have discussions, as the chair alluded to later in the budget process, about some areas where perhaps we need to budget additional funds. I know I see Kelly in the back, and I'm not to put Kelly on the spot, but we do have, we've seen a dramatic increase in the cost of interpreters for our court hearings. The supply of interpreters is very limited, which has caused costs to go up. Now, we do get some funding from the state of Wisconsin for that, some reimbursement, but that's an area where we've seen costs go up, and we saw that last year, as well as in the area of costs for lawyers, appointment of counsel. So we'll have those conversations as they come up throughout the year, but right now with these budget to actuals for the first quarter, there really wasn't anything from my perspective that was an outlier or significantly concerning. But we're happy to answer any questions you guys might have.
Any questions for the administrator on the budget to actuals? Okay, hearing none, we can move on. Next meeting date and time, announcements, and future agenda items. Committee members are asked to bring ideas for future discussion. Our next meeting is Tuesday, July 9th at 1:30 p.m. Please make sure your calendars are noted. And we're down to item 9, which is a motion to adjourn. Do I have a motion? Motion by Mask. Do we have a second? Second by Hoppe. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And then just a reminder, I believe at this time we're going to be convening for a tour of the jail.
That is correct. It is noted on your agenda. Just to comply with Wisconsin's open meetings law, we're not having a formal meeting, but we are conducting our statutorily required annual inspection of the jail. So thank you, everyone.